The day our son-in-law called to tell us the loan was technically a gift was the day we called our attorney. My name is Carol. I'm 64 years old, and I've spent the better part of 4 decades building a life with my husband, Raymond, 67. We were never wealthy people, not by any stretch. Raymond worked 31 years as a civil engineer for the county, and I spent 22 years as an office manager for a pediatric practice. We clipped coupons when our kids were small. We took exactly 1 family vacation per year, always driving distance, always renting a cabin rather than a hotel because cabins had kitchens and kitchens meant we didn't have to pay for restaurants 3 times a day. What I'm telling you is that we understood the weight of money. We respected it. We never threw it around carelessly, and we certainly never let it define our relationships. Until it did. Our daughter, Melissa, is 38 now. She was the kind of child who made you believe you'd done something right as a parent. Thoughtful, hard-working, the sort of person who remembered everyone's birthdays and showed up early when you needed help moving furniture. She married Derek when she was 33. Derek was charming in the way that only becomes suspicious in retrospect. Confident handshake, easy laugh, the kind of man who seemed to know something the rest of us didn't. Raymond liked him immediately. That should have been my first warning, because Raymond is an excellent judge of structural integrity in bridges and a famously poor judge of character in people. They got married in September, a beautiful outdoor ceremony that we contributed significantly toward. That was fine. That was what parents do. The problem started 2 years later, when Melissa called on a Tuesday afternoon in March and asked if Raymond and I would sit down with her and Derek that coming weekend because they had something they wanted to discuss. I remember that Saturday clearly. I'd made coffee cake because I always make coffee cake when people come over, a habit so ingrained that Raymond jokes I'd bake one for a home invasion. Melissa and Derek sat across from us at the kitchen table, and Derek did most of the talking, which I noted but didn't address. The situation, as Derek presented it, was this: they had found a house. A real house, not an apartment, in a neighborhood with good schools for the children they were planning to have. The house was priced at $340,000. They had saved $60,000 for a down payment. But the mortgage payments at that level, combined with their existing expenses, would leave them stretched dangerously thin. If they could put $140,000 down instead, their monthly payment would drop to something genuinely manageable, and they'd have actual financial breathing room. They needed $80,000. Derek said it like he was asking to borrow a lawnmower. Raymond and I had that money. It was sitting in a savings account, earmarked loosely for retirement supplementation, not our primary retirement fund, which was in Raymond's pension and our combined 401(k)s, but a cushion we'd built slowly over 15 years of careful living. $80,000 represented approximately 11 years of careful saving. "We'd pay you back," Derek said. "We'd pay interest even, whatever's fair. This is an investment in our future." Melissa was quiet through most of it. I watched my daughter's face while her husband made his pitch, and what I saw there was not enthusiasm. It was something more complicated, hope mixed with apology mixed with a need she couldn't articulate. Later, much later, she would tell me that she'd told Derek she didn't want to ask us. That she'd argued against it for 2 months. But Derek had a way of making you feel that refusing him was a failure of imagination. We said yes. Of course we said yes. She was our daughter. We drew up a simple promissory note, Raymond's idea, bless him, stating that Melissa and Derek jointly acknowledged receiving $80,000 from Raymond and Carol Whitfield, to be repaid in full upon the sale of the property or within 10 years, whichever came first, with 2% annual interest. Derek signed it without reading it carefully. Melissa signed it with a hand that trembled slightly. We wired the money 3 weeks later. We went to the housewarming party in June. We brought coffee cake. The first signs. For 2 years, things looked fine from the outside. Melissa and Derek hosted Thanksgiving. They got a dog. They talked vaguely about children without ever quite getting there. Derek got a promotion at his sales firm and seemed to soften slightly. He was almost humble about it, which in retrospect was probably because the promotion came with increased scrutiny of his performance and he needed allies. Then the small things started. Melissa would call me on Wednesday evenings, which had been our standing call for years, but the calls got shorter. Clipped. She'd say everything was fine in a tone that communicated something very different. Raymond noticed too. He's not a perceptive man in the emotional sense, but he notices patterns, the way an engineer notices when a structure isn't bearing weight correctly. "Something's happening with those two," he said one evening, not looking up from his book. "I know," I said. "Should we ask?" "Not yet. I've learned, over 64 years, that asking too soon about something that isn't ready to be spoken only drives it deeper underground. So I waited. In month 19 after the loan, Derek called Raymond directly. Not Melissa, Derek, and suggested that maybe, given how well the housing market had performed, the $80,000 might be thought of as a gift rather than a loan. He actually used those words. He said he'd spoken to an accountant who suggested that family financial transfers of this nature were often treated as gifts for tax purposes. Raymond is not a confrontational man. He's the sort of person who needs 24 hours to formulate an angry response. But he knew enough to say, simply and calmly, "We have a signed promissory note, Derek. It was a loan. We'll leave the accounting to accountants." Then he came and found me in the garden and stood there for a full minute before saying, "I don't like that man." "I know," I said. "We didn't tell Melissa about that call." "Not then. I've wondered many times since whether that was the right choice." The collapse. Update 1. Month 23 after the loan. Melissa called on a Thursday, not a Wednesday. The call came at 11:47 p.m., which told me everything before she said a single word. "Mom." Just that. Just the one word, and then silence, and then the sound of her trying to hold herself together through the phone. I sat up in bed, switched on the lamp, and Raymond was already awake because in 41 years of marriage he has developed the ability to sense when I've received bad news even in sleep. I put my hand on his arm and he stayed still. Melissa talked for a long time. I won't reconstruct everything she said that night because some of it belongs only to her, but the outline was this. The marriage had been deteriorating for over a year. Derek had grown distant, then critical, then, and this part she told me carefully, like she was handling something fragile, he had become emotionally controlled and financially controlling. He monitored her spending. He questioned where she was. He had, she said slowly, made her feel very small for a very long time. She had asked him to go to counseling. He had refused. She had tried again. He had responded by telling her that the problems in their marriage were her problems, and that she needed to fix herself before she could fix them. She'd met with a divorce attorney 2 weeks earlier. The attorney says because we live in a marital property state, the house will need to be addressed in the settlement, Melissa said. Her voice had steadied into something exhausted and deliberate. Derek says he wants to keep the house. He says since his name is on the mortgage, he has the primary claim. I said, carefully, Melissa, are you aware that your name is also on the promissory note you signed with us? Both of you are. I know, Mom. Does Derek know we still have that note? A pause. He seems to think it's not relevant. I told her I loved her. I told her to get some sleep. I told her we would figure it out together. After she hung up, I lay in the dark next to Raymond for a moment, and then I said, we need an attorney. Yes, Raymond said. He'd heard enough. First thing in the morning. Update 2, weeks 2 through 6. I want to be clear about something before I describe what came next. Our decision to pursue legal remedy for the loan was not about punishing Melissa. It was never about Melissa. My daughter was a victim of her own marriage in ways that broke my heart and continue to break it. Our legal action was about protecting ourselves from a man who had borrowed $80,000 of our retirement cushion and was now attempting to reclassify it in his mind as a windfall that belonged to him. We hired Patricia Osei, a civil attorney with a particular focus on family financial disputes. She was direct and efficient and charged us $320 an hour, which I mention only to underscore that pursuing justice is rarely free. Patricia reviewed the promissory note and was quiet for a moment in the specific way that attorneys are quiet when something is going well for you. This is well constructed, she said. Simple, clear, legally sufficient. Both parties signed. The loan amount, the 2% interest, the repayment terms, it's all here. She looked up. Did you transfer the funds in a way that's clearly documented? Bank wire, Raymond said. We have the records. Good. Then your claim is solid. She folded her hands. Here's the landscape. The divorce proceedings will likely take 6 to 18 months. During that time, the house is a marital asset under dispute. Your loan is a liability against that asset. Our job is to make sure that liability is recognized by the court before any settlement finalizes. Meaning what, practically? I asked. Meaning we file suit against both Melissa and Derek for repayment of the loan. We file now, before the divorce settlement is finalized, so that your claim is in the record. This accomplishes 2 things. It prevents Derek from treating the loan as a non-factor in the asset division, and it creates pressure that may actually accelerate a fair resolution. I asked the question that had been sitting at the back of my throat since the night Melissa called. This will put Melissa in a difficult position. Patricia was honest with me. Yes. It will. Will it damage her position in the divorce? Not if her attorney is competent. The loan was equally joint. Both their names are on the note. In the divorce, the debt is marital debt, it's owed by both of them. What this filing does is force Derek to reckon with the reality that the house carries an $80,000 obligation that predates any settlement he might imagine walking away with. Raymond and I went home and talked about it for 3 days. 3 full days of careful, sometimes painful conversation, going over it from every angle. We talked about what we owed Melissa. We talked about what we owed ourselves. We talked about whether pursuing Derek meant hurting our daughter. We came back to the same answer every time. We had a signed legal document. The money was real. Derek's plan was, transparently, to keep the house, which had appreciated to approximately $395,000 by that point, and simply absorb the loan as a cost of the asset, treating our $80,000 as a contribution to his net worth. We were being managed. We were being handled. We filed on a Wednesday. Melissa found out from Derek before she found out from us, because Derek's attorney contacted her attorney as soon as the suit was served. She called me at 4:30 on a Thursday afternoon, and the first 30 seconds of that conversation were the hardest 30 seconds of my adult life. "Mom, what did you do?" "We filed suit for repayment of the loan, sweetheart." "You sued me." "You sued your own daughter." "We sued Derek." "You happen to be jointly named on the note." Mom, that's a technicality. You know that's a technicality." I took a breath. "Melissa, listen to me. Derek is trying to keep that house. That house has $80,000 of our money in it. If we don't file, we have no legal standing when the divorce settlement divides the asset. We lose everything we lent you." Silence. "Derek told me you were trying to punish him," she said quietly. "Melissa, Derek also told you the loan was a gift. Derek redefines things when the original definition stops serving him." Another silence, longer this time. "I know," she finally said. And in those 2 words I heard my daughter, my real daughter, the one who existed underneath 3 years of being slowly diminished, come back to me a little. "I love you," I told her. "This is not about you." "I know, Mom," she said again. Update 3. Months 3 through 7. The period that followed was complicated in the way that only family legal disputes can be, where the people who love each other are arrayed in opposition not by choice but by circumstance, and everyone has to navigate the machinery of the legal system while still trying to pass the green beans at Christmas. Derek hired an attorney who attempted, in the early stages, to argue that the $80,000 transfer had been a gift. This argument required him to ignore the signed promissory note, which is a bold strategy in the same way that ignoring a stop sign is a bold strategy. Patricia dispatched it efficiently, submitting the note, the wire transfer records, and a brief detailing the legal definition of a promissory note versus a gift instrument. The counter-argument collapsed within 6 weeks. Derek's attorney then pivoted to arguing that even if the loan was legitimate, its repayment should be considered the responsibility of both parties equally, meaning Melissa owed half and Derek owed half, and since Derek was being awarded the house in the proposed settlement, Melissa's half should simply transfer to her as a debt she carried out of the marriage. Patricia looked at this proposal with visible disdain. "They're trying to use your lawsuit to saddle your daughter with $40,000 of debt, while Derek keeps a house worth nearly $400,000. She paused. "The court will not smile on this." She was right. The divorce judge, who was handling the dissolution, not our civil suit, but before whom our suit had been entered as a relevant liability, made clear in a preliminary hearing that the $80,000 debt was a marital liability incurred jointly and attached to the property itself. If Derek wanted to keep the house, Derek needed to resolve the debt against it. Either refinance and pay the loan from equity, sell the house and distribute proceeds with the loan paid first, or negotiate some combination. Derek did not like any of these options. Melissa, for her part, was doing something that made me quietly proud. She was holding her ground. Her attorney, a sharper woman than I initially gave credit for, was pushing for a clean break. Melissa didn't want the house. She'd told me privately that she didn't want to live in those rooms anymore, that they held too many versions of herself she was trying to move past. She wanted a fair share of the equity, resolution of the shared debts, and her freedom. "Derek keeps saying I'm taking his home," she told me over dinner one night. The 2 of us, just us, at a small Italian place near her temporary apartment. She was eating properly, I noticed. She'd lost weight in the early months but was coming back to herself. "He says this is the house he's going to grow old in. He talks about it like it's a person." "Some men," I said carefully, "attach to objects when they can't attach to people." She looked at me for a moment. Then she laughed, a real laugh, the first one I'd heard from her in months. "Mom, that's the most you've ever said about Derek." "I'm practicing restraint," I said. Around month 5, Derek made what Patricia described as a classic mistake. He stopped being reasonable and started being theatrical. He gave an interview, informally, to a neighborhood newsletter of all things, in which he characterized the lawsuit as his in-laws weaponizing family against him during a vulnerable time. He spoke about the house as his sanctuary, and implied that Melissa's family was conducting a coordinated campaign to destroy him financially. Patricia forwarded me the newsletter with a one-line email. He just made our case easier. The theatrical turn did several things Derek hadn't anticipated. It alienated his own attorney, who sent a carefully worded letter to Patricia suggesting that her client was committed to resolution. It prompted the divorce mediator to note that Derek's public characterizations of ongoing proceedings were unhelpful. And it caused Derek's parents, who had been quietly supportive of him throughout, to have a conversation with him that, according to Melissa who heard about it secondhand, involved his mother saying, "Derek, you borrowed their retirement money. You need to pay it back." Momentum was shifting. We could feel it. Update 4, Month 8. The resolution approaches. The settlement negotiation took 11 days of back and forth between attorneys. I won't pretend I wasn't anxious during that time. Raymond and I had 2 phone calls a day with Patricia, sometimes 3, and I made approximately 40 coffee cakes out of nervous energy, several of which I brought to Patricia's office because I had to do something with them. The framework that eventually emerged looked like this. The house would be sold. Both parties had agreed, finally, that neither of them actually wanted to stay in it if the other one had the ability to make the next several years difficult. The listing price was set at $399,000, reflecting the market. From the proceeds, after the remaining mortgage of approximately $218,000 was satisfied, the liquid equity of roughly $181,000 would be distributed as follows. First, our $80,000 loan plus accrued interest of approximately $4,800 would be repaid to Raymond and me. The remaining $96,200 would be divided equally between Melissa and Derek, giving each of them approximately $48,100. Derek did not accept this gracefully. According to Melissa, who heard it from her attorney, he sat in the mediation room when the final terms were presented and stared at the table for a very long time. Then he said something about how this wasn't what he'd planned for his life. I felt, reading between the lines of Melissa's account, briefly sorry for him. Just briefly. He was a person who had made a set of choices. To borrow money he hoped to never repay, to control a partner who deserved freedom, to reframe reality when it stopped serving him, and those choices had consequences that were now landing on him all at once. That's not tragedy. That's arithmetic. The house went on the market in month 8. It received 3 offers in the first week and sold in 10 days for $403,500. Update 5. The aftermath. We received our check, $84,800, the principal plus interest, on a Thursday in November. Raymond held it for a long moment when it arrived, and then he put it on the kitchen table and looked at it and said, "Well, just that." Well, I agreed. We didn't celebrate. It didn't feel like a victory in the way you'd celebrate a victory. It felt like getting back something that had always been yours, which is less satisfying and more exhausting than it sounds. We were glad. We were relieved. We were tired in a way that had very little to do with physical fatigue. Patricia sent a brief congratulatory note with her final invoice. She had been professional and precise throughout, and I was deeply grateful for her, even though her billing had consumed approximately $12,000 of what we'd recovered, which Raymond and I had accepted as the cost of doing this correctly. Melissa called the evening the house closed. She was in her apartment, a new one, nicer than the temporary place she'd been in, and she sounded like a person who had set down something very heavy and was still getting used to what it felt like to have her hands free. "How are you?" I asked. "I'm okay," she said. "I'm actually okay." A pause. "I have $48,000 in my savings account. I've never had that much money that was just mine. What are you going to do with it?" "I'm going to start over," she said. "Carefully. Like you and Dad." I had to put the phone down for a moment. Reflection. It's been 6 months since the house closed. Here is what I know now that I didn't know when this started, or that I knew but couldn't articulate. Lending money to family is an act of love, but it must also be an act of clarity. The promissory note that Raymond insisted on, quietly, without drama, just a simple document, was the thing that saved us. Not just financially. Legally, yes. But also it saved us from the fog of he said, she said, from the rewriting of history that Derek spent months attempting. A document doesn't care about narratives. A document says what happened. People will sometimes call formality within family cold or untrusting. They will say that asking a child to sign a loan document is an act of doubt. I disagree. The document was an act of respect, respect for the seriousness of what was being exchanged, respect for everyone's dignity when the exchange would eventually need to be examined. It treated everyone like an adult. The informality that Derek wanted, the gift, the handshake, the comfortable ambiguity, was what would have allowed him to recast the entire thing in whatever light served him best. Formality is kindness with paperwork. I've also learned something about the difference between protecting yourself and punishing someone else. Filing that lawsuit felt, in the early days, like we were doing something aggressive, something that required justification, perhaps apology. Derek and his attorneys certainly wanted us to feel that way. They framed our legal claim as an attack, an escalation, a cruelty inflicted on a family in pain. But we had done nothing except lend money with documentation and then, when the documentation was being ignored, ask a court to honor it. That is the legal system functioning as intended. We did not shout. We did not threaten. We did not call people at night or write letters designed to frighten. We filed paperwork and let the process proceed. The discomfort that Derek felt was not something we inflicted on him. It was the natural consequence of attempting to walk away from a legal obligation. There's a version of this story where Raymond and I absorb the loss. Where we decide that our relationship with Melissa is more important than $80,000 and we quietly write it off and spend the remaining years of our retirement a little more carefully. I understand that version. I've thought about it many times. Good people can choose that path and feel at peace with it. But we chose differently, and I don't regret it. Not because of Derek. I genuinely wish him a life in which he becomes a better version of himself, and I mean that, but because we had spent 30 years building that cushion carefully, and allowing it to be absorbed into someone else's assets through inertia and discomfort would have been a failure of our own stewardship. We owed it to ourselves. And in a way that took me a long time to fully understand, we owed it to Melissa, too. Because showing our daughter that her parents enforce their own limits, that they defend what is rightfully theirs through appropriate means, that they don't simply absorb mistreatment and call it love, that was a lesson. Perhaps a more useful one than anything we tried to teach her directly. Melissa had dinner with us last Sunday. She brought wine, a thing she'd started doing since the divorce, and Raymond made his pot roast. We sat at the same kitchen table where Derek had pitched his loan request 4 years earlier, and we talked about her new job, which she'd started 3 months ago and which involved skills she'd been quietly developing for years but hadn't been encouraged to use. We talked about Raymond's knee, which is objecting to the stairs with increasing volume. We talked about the garden, which is planning to be ambitious next spring. We did not talk about Derek. There wasn't anything left to say. At the end of the evening, Melissa hugged me in the doorway the way she hadn't hugged me in years, fully, both arms, for a real length of time, and then she pulled back and looked at me and said, "Thank you for fighting for the loan." "We fought for ourselves," I said. "I know," she said. "That's what I mean. Thank you for showing me what that looks like." I watched her walk to her car in the autumn evening, this daughter of mine who is starting over at 38 with $48,000 and a job she's good at and her hands finally free of something that had been pulling her down for years. Raymond appeared at my shoulder with a dish towel. "She's going to be all right," he said. "Yes," I said. "She is." We went back inside and did the dishes, the two of us, the way we have done the dishes for 41 years, and I thought about the coffee cake I'd make next week when she came for her Wednesday call. Not the visiting kind. Just the ordinary kind. The kind you make because people are coming over and you love them and that's what you do. For those asking, yes, we would do it again. No, not without a promissory note. Get everything in writing. Every time.